Over the past 14 months, we have become obsessed with safety. In particular, the need to be safe from the infection by COVID-19. Because of the danger posed by this virus, we have necessarily developed a very different lifestyle from the one that we led in the before times. We started washing our hands more frequently, even counting the number of seconds that it took us to lather up, and tried to be more aware of touching, or rather not touching, our faces. We began wearing face masks everywhere we went and keeping our distance from those outside our household. Some of us started having groceries delivered or only went to the store during senior hours, and the use of online purchasing exploded. We stopped gathering with family members and friends, even those who lived close by, and began meeting on Zoom, an online service that many of us had never even heard of before then. In-person worship came to an abrupt halt, and our church buildings were closed. We monitored our bodies, watching for symptoms that might indicate that the virus had found its way into the safe space that we worked so hard to create for ourselves and for our loved ones. Safe space. When I say those words, I think of baseball players diving for home plate, hoping to hear the umpire shout, "Safe!" and of my own sense of relief when I made it to home base while playing a game of hide and seek as a child. I think of the way children run to the safety of their parents' arms, and how even now we let our kids know that we are back safe home again, a quote from a children's book by Richard Scarry, when we return from a trip. And of course, I think of the safety of my home in the midst of the pandemic. Having safe space is important to all of us, which is why that statement, that phrase, is included in our church's vision statement. That statement, which you'll find at the bottom of the bulletin, reads in part, "Following the example of Jesus Christ, El Segundo United Methodist Church seeks to be a community of faith that embodies the love of God by creating a safe space in which all are supported on their faith journey." What does it mean to create safe space? When I look up safe in my online dictionary, the most prominent meaning is protected from harm or not exposed to danger or risk. The word space, as used in this sentence, might mean both a physical space or a feeling of comfort or freedom. This leads me to ask what safe space means in the context of our church. From what kind of danger do we need to be kept safe in church, and how does our church protect us from harm? Obviously, we want our church facilities to be physically as safe as possible, which is why we try to keep our buildings clean, our stair rails firmly attached to the walls, and our walkways free of debris. Right now, we're also working hard to make sure that when in-person worship resumes, we are doing everything we can to ensure that no one contracts COVID-19 while on church premises, including being insistent that everyone wear a face mask and stay 6 feet apart while on our property, and that people stay home if they're experiencing any symptoms that might indicate infection. Our church also seeks to ensure another kind of safety. We have a policy about child abuse prevention, and whether they work with children or not, every one of our staff members is required to undergo a background check and to take an online training class about this important topic. Volunteers with children and youth are also required to undergo a background check, and we do our best to ensure that everyone follows practices that will keep our children and youth safe. Our staff members are also required to take an online training class about the prevention of sexual harassment. All these practices and others are, of course, designed to make our church buildings and activities free from the child abuse and harassment that have caused so much pain and suffering. The church as a whole has not always been a safe space, and we must continue to do all that we can to ensure that this is not true of our community of faith. But there is another kind of safety that is needed in the community of faith, a subtler one. The church needs to be a space in which every person is accepted for who they are. We believe, of course, that our church is friendly and that all people are welcome here, and for the most part, that is true. Our calling as Christians, however, is not simply to be friendly, but rather to offer true acceptance, the gift of affirmation and support and love. I think that this is so important, especially important in a time when hatred and discrimination are on the rise, when our society needs a clear witness to the truth that all people have value, especially in the eyes of God. It's also important as the United Methodist Church continues to debate the status of LGBTQIA persons in the community of faith. But it is equally important for those who struggle with addiction or maintaining mental health, or those who are other-abled. Most of all, however, it is important because all of us need to know that we are persons of worth, that we are accepted and loved. Sadly, a warm welcome at the door does not always translate into safe space in the ongoing context of church life. It is so easy to condemn, ridicule, or shun someone who does not fit in with the congregation, whether that be because of their dress, their speech, or their relationships. Not that we church folks are blatant with our disapproval, and I would emphasize we, for here I am as guilty as anyone. No, our lack of acceptance tends to show itself in avoidance or in gossipy conversations with others rather than outright rejection. Ironically, Jesus himself was subject to such conversations not because of who he was, but because of who he chose to accept, those whom society had rejected. In the 2nd chapter of Mark, for example, Jesus attends a dinner at the home of a tax collector named Levi. When the religious authorities see this, they ask his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Clearly, they disapproved of Jesus' action. Likewise, in Luke 8, a Pharisee named Simon looks down on Jesus when he allows a woman to wash and anoint his feet. If this man were a prophet, Simon thought, he would have known what kind of woman this is who is touching him, that she is a sinner. Despite such condemnation, however, Jesus created safe space for all kinds of people, for women and children, for lepers and Samaritan, tax collectors and Gentiles, and for those whom others had labeled sinners. Over and over again, he affirmed the worth of people who were scorned by others and welcomed them to the love of God. And because we are followers of Jesus, we are called to do the same. This is not to say that Jesus never challenged those whom he affirmed. Yes, he offered forgiveness and healing to them, but there were times when he also encouraged them to change, not who they were, but how they lived. When Zacchaeus announced that he would come to the home of a tax collector named Zacchaeus, for example, the man was so moved by Jesus' acceptance that he offered to give half of his possessions to the poor and to pay back anyone whom he had defrauded 4 times, a fourfold. And Jesus said, "Today salvation has come to this house." Now, I say these things hoping that we will be careful, for we are not Jesus, and it is not our task to judge another's way of life. Instead, we are called to walk alongside one another on our respective faith journeys. As it says in the 5th chapter of 1 Thessalonians, the people of God are to encourage one another and to build up each other, to create safe space in which everyone can learn and grow and flourish. If this sounds one-sided, think again. For when we create safe space for others, we also create it for ourselves. We all experience starts and stops, moments of certainty and moments of clarity on our journey of faith. And we need a safe space to question and wrestle in order to continue and to grow. We need the support and love of others when we are struggling. We need each other. Think of all that we have to learn from one another as we journey together. Think of the stories that we might hear, the laughter and tears that we might share, the miracles that we might witness. Think of the hope that we might give. Think of how our entire community of faith might be strengthened in its witness to the love of God and Jesus Christ by making our church safe for everyone. Think of the blessings that we will receive. So how do we, as the church, create safe space? A good start might be to look at our buildings and our worship service from the perspective of someone who is new. It takes a lot of courage for someone to walk into an unfamiliar building and find their way around, to take a seat in a room full of strangers and to engage in worship without any experience in that church's practices. How can we make that experience more comfortable, easier, more welcoming? How can we create safe space for those who are dealing with issues that are not immediately obvious, such as anxiety or grief, or for those whose physical challenges prevent them from participating in worship like everyone else? We might also think about how we as individuals respond to those whose needs may disturb us, such as a single parent with a noisy child who's not comfortable leaving him in the care of strangers in the nursery or Sunday school. It might also be helpful to look at how we welcome people into the ongoing life of the church. Do we make it a point to invite someone new to a small group or circle and to truly include them when we do? For that matter, are we willing to break apart existing groups in order to form new groups for people to join? Do we invite people to help when help is needed, and are we open to their suggestions when they do help? I will be the first to admit I am not good at this. It's so much easier for me to do it myself. Of course, some things that we might be able to do otherwise will not be possible given the restrictions that we are putting in place because of the pandemic. Talk about creating safe space. But here's the thing. The long pause in church activity that we have experienced over the past 14 months presents us with a golden opportunity to reevaluate our practices and to take a new look at old ways. In the end, of course, creating safe space is more than dealing with physical space, worship practices, and small group dynamics. It is an invitation for you and me to reflect on our own experiences of acceptance and rejection, and to examine the assumptions that we make about others. That takes courage, the courage to look within, to acknowledge the ways in which we fail to treat others as we want to be treated, and to repent. Creating safe space also means recognizing that the church exists, our church exists for all people, not just for ourselves, that it is meant to be shared, not held close, and that the ties that bind our hearts in Christian love are greater than those that divide us. It might even mean reviving that old United Methodist slogan, open hearts, open hands, open doors, and being intentional about living it out. In other words, creating safe space necessitates a change of heart and mind. Perhaps remembering that many of the Psalms describe God as a shelter, a shield, and a refuge may be helpful. How can our church reflect those divine attributes in our communal life? For that matter, how might each of us reflect that acceptance and create safe space in which to meet and engage with others in our daily lives? Dear friends, I am so thankful that we are on this journey together. And I pray that God will help this community of faith to be that safe space, demonstrating the affirming, accepting love of God to all whom we encounter. May it be so. Amen.